Father, we thank you that we have the chance tonight to worship you once again in our study of the Word. We pray, Lord, as we navigate our way through the teacher's writings in the book of Ecclesiastes. We pray that you would illumine us, give us what we need. And Father, when the teacher is taking us down a path that seems to be part of his own struggle of recognizing what matters most in life, I pray that your Spirit will lead us to the more complete revelation we find in Jesus Christ, which gives us hope of eternal life and knowledge of why we are here. So, Lord, bless this evening. Use it for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. So, just to give you guys a framework, this will be our second to last class. So we're going to do tonight chapter 10 and 11. And next week, we're going to wrap up with chapter 12. Chapter 12 is a very good chapter, any way you cut it. We're actually going to touch a theme of chapter 12 tonight, because chapter 11 kind of ends with a preview of chapter 12. And I want to say once again, I think it's necessary in this book to recognize what the teacher is doing is putting his finger on real issues, real questions. So what he's touching upon, some of it to us seems, can you really say that? But as Christians, we often feel what he is saying out loud. And what I am encouraged by in Scripture is the Scripture doesn't hide anything. It tells us the real issues that are taking place. Sometimes we're cautious to deal with it, but the Scripture isn't cautious. And I just finished teaching a preaching class called Learn to Preach. And one of the students asked a very good question, kind of a convicting question. He said, I've sat under your teaching for my entire life. Okay, you know something's coming up when he says that. And it feels like you're picking and choosing the passages you want to talk about. Now, in some respects, that's true. You know, what causes you to do a Bible study of Esther and not Isaiah? You know, it's a choice that you're making, being limited time and how you're going to do it. And then when you do a book study like 2 Timothy, we did fairly recently, you tend to pick the part of that chapter that you want to preach, and maybe not so much the parts that are less enjoyable to preach. And I said to him, that is true. However, I would say it's done prayerfully. In other words, Lord, what does this congregation need to hear? Because sometimes when people mean deep, they mean confusing. And in reality, it's pretty deep to love your neighbor as yourself if you're not doing it. That might be easy to understand, but that might be what the Spirit is asking the church to pay attention to. And so I recognize that. But that being said, one of the reasons I love this environment, meaning the midweek Bible class, is I can't escape anything. So I have taught on every single verse in the New Testament and about 1/3 of the Old Testament, and there's no hiding. And so when you get to difficult passages, which the teacher gives us on a weekly basis, it is no escape. We're going to have a couple tonight where he's like, really? Why would you say that? And we'll get to that when the time comes. That being said, though, let's take a peek at tonight's quiz, which is quiz 9. I think this is posted online, so if you're watching online, if you want to participate in the quiz, you go to the web page of Shelter Rock Church, go to the resource button, and then you'll see Bible class, click on that, and it should be on the first page. So, here's the first question. We should obey the king because you took an oath. You will keep safe that way. You will win his favor. He does what he pleases. Now, in one respect, all of them are right. However, the ones that come up in the text are these. The text doesn't specifically say at this point, you will win his favor. But it does start right overtly, you took an oath, so obey the king. Second one is, you will keep safe that way. That's coming from the whole first paragraph of that chapter. You know, he's basically giving a statement of wisdom. If your boss wants you to do something and you're going to flaunt what your boss says, you're not in a safe position. Now, you might not get killed by your boss like the king might do, but you could still get fired or be ostracized and no longer promoted. And so, honor what the king wants. I had a staff member who really didn't like what the executive pastor was asking. And the executive pastor is no longer with the church now, Frank O'Neill. And Frank was a man who was pretty easy to please if you just do what you're supposed to do. And so this person just did not want to do what Pastor Frank said. And so I had a heart-to-heart with them because they were complaining to me about the executive pastor. I said, what is he asking you to do? Well, this. Is there something wrong with this? Well, no, but why don't you just do these 3 things and you will be in good position with the executive pastor? Oh, all right. But I never understood that logic. If this is what the guy wants, just do it. He's not asking you a hard thing. Do you remember when Naaman comes to Israel because he has leprosy? And Elijah says, dip yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. And he says, that's disgusting, the Jordan River. And by the way, if you've been to Israel, it's disgusting, the Jordan River. It's just some of this silt and muddy-looking river. And so he says, we have much nicer rivers in Damascus. And his servant wisely said, what did he ask you to do? Just do it. Good grief. You take a bath after you're done, And he does it, and he's healed. And, so he's so happy. But in that sense, just do what the king says, he says. And the last one, he does what he pleases. And that is, you just can't control what the king does. He's going to do what he wants to do because he's the king. So, next question. The teacher says that things will go better if we, A, earn lots of money, B, fear the Lord, C, whistle while we work, D, work hard. And the answer that he says in the text most overtly is fear the Lord. However, tonight we're going to see he has a very fond view of A too. But we're not on that section yet, so we'll just go with B as the right answer. Fear the Lord. Now, one should pause because for those of you who grew up in a biblical environment, that phrase may not mean anything negative to you. But let's be honest. It is kind of creepy when you're not a Christian and you hear you're supposed to be afraid of God? What kind of God is that? Which is why many modern translations use the word reverence. It is a sense of awe and respect to fear the Lord. I think the best way, I think most of us probably are glad that there are police officers around. However, when we're going 72 on Northern State and we suddenly notice a police car on the side, suddenly we don't like the police and we fear the police. Fear of the Lord, or respect or reverence for the Lord, keeps us wise. And so I think what he's saying here, if you respect or fear the Lord, you're going to honor what he says, which means you're probably going to keep yourself out of a lot of problems. And that's just something to be wise about. So fearing the Lord kind of is another way of saying adhere to what he says, what the Lord would have you do. Number 3, the teacher commends the enjoyment of life, so you should A, eat and drink, B, toil with joy, C, be glad, D, sing to the Lord. And the answer is the first 3. I don't think the teacher's too big on singing. I don't remember him ever saying, sing. So definitely not whistle while you work. That doesn't seem to be his mode. But he does regularly say, eat and drink. And I have to say, I am one of those people, what are Steve's vices? One of them is Diet Coke. Everyone who loves health food tells me, why are you drinking Diet Coke, Pastor Steve? And then I point out, when was the last time you had alcohol? Well, yesterday. When the last time I had it was 1973. I don't drink at all. And in fact, just on a fun note, the first time I tasted alcohol was I was dating a young woman, and I went to a communion at her Lutheran church. And I thought it was grape juice. And they had these little cups, and I did, it burns, because they use port wine, which is not even the light stuff. It's very strong stuff. And this girlfriend, one of Steve's weird things, I'm like friends with all my old girlfriends. And so this girlfriend's father lives in Las Vegas. And she posted on Facebook, her father is a street preacher, 82 years old. And I love senior citizens, so I'm almost one myself. So I wrote her and I said, would it be okay if I visit your dad in Las Vegas when I go out there? And she said, oh, please, that would be awesome. So I went to visit him, and I told him that story about, so your daughter corrupted me. I was like, how so? He says, she got me drinking in your church. And I said, I got to ask you, too. I don't know of a lot of Lutherans who do street preaching. And he says, oh, that's true. I'm not really Lutheran anymore. What? If you ever been to Vegas, there's this casino called the Bellagio. You probably have seen it if you ever watch any of the Ocean's 11 movies or things like that. But it has this fountain that goes off, and it has this water show that goes for like 8 minutes. So that's his perfect place to set up as a street preacher, because crowds start gathering to watch the water show. He doesn't interrupt the water show, but the crowds are all waiting for it to begin. So he says, I'd like to tell you about Jesus Christ today. And so I'm going out into Nevada for about a week in January. He's invited me to preach with him on the street. And I don't know. I mean, what do you think of street preaching? I mean, do you think it's effective? I don't know. I'm not so sure. So a preacher I heard once, his name is James Meeks. He's a pastor of a church of 20,000 in Chicago. And he told this story. He says, I'm riding on the L, which is what they call the subway in Chicago. And there's this preacher in the car. And I'm like, oh, he's embarrassing me. And I prayed. I said, God, why do you allow these people to preach and represent you? They're crazy. And he said, the Lord answered me. The reason why I allow it is the sane ones won't do it. Like, okay. So I told this guy that story, and he got a kick out of it. But along getting back to this, eat and drink. Solomon, the teacher, Koheleth, whoever you want to call the guy, he really advocates eating, and I will say I comfort myself with food and drink. Toil with joy. We've talked about this already, but if you like what you do, celebrate it. That is one of the joys he mentions. And quite honestly, if you don't love what you do, is there an opportunity for you to adjust what you do? That's a fair question. Gus, do you like what you do now?
Yep, sure do.
Yep. He is man's best friend. Takes care of animals and all that kind of stuff. And if you're able to do what you love to do and you can eat simultaneously, that is a trick. You need to have enough money to eat. But what a difference it makes. And I've said over and over again that my best day on Amtrak is not as good as my worst day as a pastor, because it was just not as great of a job. I mean, I didn't hate my job, but being a pastor is better. And be glad. Now, that's a hard one to just like turn a switch and be glad. But the way he says it implies that you have something involved with that. And let me just ask you a question. Do you have in your life a happy place? Happy people that you're with? I know I do. If I am feeling like I need conversation, there are people I have lunch with. They make me happy. And there are other people I have lunch with because I need to for my job, because it's not going to bring me happiness. And so when you know where the door to happiness is, like when I come done here today, I'm going to go home. My wife and I will sit on the couch. I'm going to lean on her, and we're going to watch an episode of Chopped. And I will be glad. I got a cute wife to lean on. I have a snack I'll be eating because I get comfort with food. We already talked about this. And I'm watching an innocuous show in which, it'll be enjoyable. So why not pursue gladness if you know where gladness resides? It's a very simple point. Number 4, in a moment of lucidity, which implies I sometimes think the teacher does not have lucidity. In a moment of lucidity, the teacher recognizes that A, life is meaningless. B, all is vanity. C, work is a waste of time. D, no one comprehends what goes on under the sun. Well, considering the first 3 are his normal status, it is that last one. This is one of those rare moments where the teacher, I think, gets it, that you really don't know the answers. In my philosophical years, particularly at Stony Brook University, the passages that meant a lot to me were like Isaiah 55, which Isaiah the prophet writes, he's speaking for God, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. As high as the heavens are from the earth, are my ways from your ways. That makes sense to me because it doesn't seem like anything on this earth makes a whole lot of sense. And so I think, I don't think anyone understands what's going on under the sun. I'll say that right now when it comes to COVID-19. We have all these people in panic over this Omicron variant, which they announced there is no known case in the United States right now. Now, I expect that there probably will be at some point, but the bottom line is we moved to panic mode instantaneously. And I'm like, breathe in, breathe out, trust God. Because our lives are in his hands anyway. And so just rest there. Next one. The righteous and the wise have this advantage. Hard work, good food, they are in God's hands, they love each other. I wish the last one was true. Sometimes it is hard work and sometimes good food. The answer we're looking for here, though, is they are in God's hands. Now, again, I would call this an island of hope in this depressing book, but that is a good thing, to know you're in the hands of the Lord. I told you the story last week. My mom was in the hospital for 6 hours last Sunday night. It was a drag. It was a crummy experience at North Shore Hospital. But one thing I know is we were in God's hands. And as Christians, we have a real perk. Because are we righteous because of what we do? We're righteous because of what Jesus did. So it's not saying that you and I have to be perfect. It is saying, as a Christian, we need to be in Christ. And wisdom is something we all can pursue and all can hold on to. All right, so good to be in God's hands. Number 6, who is better than a dead lion? Interesting question. A live dog, a live salamander, a tree, a dead king. And the answer is A. There you go, Gus. Except they would not view dogs as man's best friend. They are a pest. And it's funny, even to this day in the Middle East, dogs are a dirty animal. And if you ever go to Detroit or Dearborn and you take a bus, you might be introduced to a seeing eye horse on the bus. Dearborn has the highest concentration of Islamic folks in the United States. Dogs are considered a dirty animal. So they made accommodation and they allow these little tiny, well, they're not tiny, small horses, which are probably twice the size of a Great Dane. I mean, they're still pretty big, but they allow them to go on the buses and everything. And that is because of the feeling that dogs are dirty animals. But for them, or I should say the teacher, he's just making a point, anything alive is better than anything dead. So it's irrelevant if you're a dead king. I mean, it's no different. Number 7, one thing the living have is food and drink, hope, sadness, toil. I'm going to take a guess on that one. It is hope. hope. And that makes some sense, because as long as you're breathing, there is possibility. What might God have in store? And, I'm not a lottery fan, but their phrase, you have to be in it to win it. But I'll say this, people who buy a lottery ticket, they have this inkling of hope. I would say it's somewhat pointless, but there's this inkling of hope that, they're going to get wealthy. And if you are alive, you have to consider that possibility, that something good could happen. How novel is that? It's a good principle. So I think he's right there. I do. Number 8, if you are joyful, you might want to anoint your head with oil, sing, eat and drink, be clothed in white. Now, I would say, I already answered B. There's not a lot of singing in this book, so probably not B. C clearly seems plausible, but not based on the section we have. And so the answer is anoint your head with oil and be clothed in white, which for us just sounds funny, but it signifies for them you're heading to a party. In other words, that was something. So think the 1950s and you're a greaser, and so you oil up your hair, and you're heading out to look good. Then we move to the dry look, so we don't have that as much. But in their world, oil was something you did, and clothing in white was something, because you don't work in white. It is something you do when you're relaxing, and so that conveys that. Number 9, there was a poor wise man who saved a city. He died anyway. He had joy. He was rewarded. No one remembered him. Regrettably, it's the last one. This is so typical of the teacher. He tells us a story about this guy who really of no consequence. No one really knew who he was, but he was wise. And he saved the whole city. Who was that guy? Oh, well. It's like, could the teacher cut him some slack? Can he even say that he was himself happy? Something, but no. He says no one remembered him. But I will pause for a moment, because that is a big issue for him to be remembered. How important that is in real life for you and I to be remembered. I mean, it is something a lot of us value. People say that the first half of your life, you're searching for success. And the last part of your life, you're searching for significance, that your life mattered. But one of my professor friends from Denver Theological Seminary, Marshall Shelley, he said, well, that may be true, but it sounds like it's the sin of greed followed by the sin of pride. I think he's right. Because the first part of your life, we want lots of stuff. And the second part of our life, did my life matter? I don't bump into a lot of 20-year-olds saying, I'm going to write my book. But people my age, they're like, oh yes, I'm going to be writing a book, telling all my stories and, all this stuff. My mom said something rather profound when my brother died. So my brother died at age 50, 51, something like that. And, for a parent in particular, it is so hard grieving the loss of a child. But I remember I came to visit Mom. I was still living in Illinois at the time. I came to visit. And she, kind of with a tear in her eye, said, it all comes down to a box. And what she meant by that is my brother was not a wealthy person. All of their furniture was garbage. There was nothing really worth keeping except one box with a few memorabilia items in it. And that was it. It all comes down to a box. And I think the sooner we own that and just kind of realize, what diff does it make? And, just entrust your life to the Lord. I think we're in a better place. I think we are. Now, I would say where I would vary my statement is if your legacy is believing sons and daughters and believing great-grandchildren, and that's a good legacy, because now you're investing into glory. And I think that's what Jesus taught us. He said, don't invest in things which moth and rust destroy, but invest in things that are eternal. And people are eternal. Last year, when we had the election, that very peaceful moment in our nation's history where everyone was just loving each other, getting along, and it was just amazing how much our nation loves each other. It really is. Now, anyway, I filmed the message that week at Teddy Roosevelt's grave. And my point, very simple, was, here we are, Teddy Roosevelt on virtually every poll is in the top 5 presidents of the United States. And there I am at his graveside, arguably at one point the most powerful man on the face of the earth. And all I could hear was crickets. There was no one there. I'm just by an empty grave. That's it. That's what it comes down to. You might read about him in history or something like that, but it's not like he's any different than the gravestone next to him. In fact, the teacher would agree with this, would he not? The one thing that presidents and average Joes have in common, they both end up in a hole in the ground. Doesn't change that much. But this idea of being remembered is important for the teacher. I do think, though, that Jesus would probably nuance that and say, not as important in investing into the future. Our last one. Wisdom is better than strength, money, love, position. And the answer he gives is strength. It's better than strength. When I worked for Amtrak, I supervised the crew, and I had a dining car steward who is the second in charge on the train. The chief is the first in charge. But this dining car steward was a wise guy. I mean, he was in his probably early 70s, and I'm in my 30s. And he says, Chief, come here. Sit down a second. Let me give you a piece of advice. Better to wear out the seat of your pants than the sole of your shoe. And he was making this point because as this young chief, I'm walking back and forth in the train all the way to San Francisco from Chicago. Walking back and forth. I want to make sure everything's okay. And meanwhile, the dining car steward is feeding 400 passengers, sitting in a seat, giving some instructions, making it clear. And he sees me scurrying along, doing all this stuff, and I thought, well, that's not bad advice. Better to wear out the seat of your pants than the sole of your shoe. So I say it tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but I saw there may be some wisdom there that we need to adhere to. All right, we had our quiz, 10 questions. How'd you guys do? Anyone get close to 10 out of 10? Excellent. Wow, and you're not even in the classes. Amazing. So that's good, though. That's very good. All right, we're going to dig in now to chapters 10 and 11. And what we're going to find is a lot of what he says here sounds very, very similar to the book of Proverbs. We're going to have these little statements of wisdom that just keep flying through, and you can, just wrestle with them, think about them. So, chapter 10, verse 1 says this: As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. So, I have never tried perfume with a dead fly in it. So I can't speak to that directly, but I'll take his word on it that a dead fly doesn't look, inspiring in our perfume. But his point is a little folly can destroy, outweighs wisdom and honor. Do you think that's true? Now, it's in the Bible. Of course it's true, Pastor Steve. But you know what? He said some things that we've had to challenge. So I want to say, is that true? I reflected on that for a little while, and one of the things that I reflected on is careers that have been destroyed over stupid decisions. So if you looked at, for example, President Nixon, minus Watergate, you would see open the door to China. You would see the economy moved well. I mean, he was voted in by more people than any president in history, except for George Washington, meaning by percentage, up until that time in history. But one crucial mistake, and most argue that it was the mistake of a cover-up, that it wasn't even his brainchild to do something stupid like break into the Democratic headquarters. It was common crooks. But because he tried to cover it, that was his mistake. And now he goes down in history as one of the worst presidents ever. But if you took that out, he'd probably be considered one of the better presidents. And you're like, what happened? But look at preachers. You remember Jimmy Swaggart? I have sinned, and he cries publicly on TV. This guy filled stadiums around the United States. And whether you thought his preaching was, health and wealth or whatever, the guy was an accomplished minister. And now, he has this still network on TV, but a shadow of what it was previously. And whenever you hear any secular media talk about him, what's the first thing they mention? The guy who was caught, ... And I think to myself, yeah, I think a little folly does mess up even the best of careers. It's just, it happens. And I think he's right with that statement. 2, the heart of the wise inclines to the right, the heart of the fool to the left, which is why the Republicans are right and the Democrats are wrong. Now, before anyone throws anything at me, I just couldn't resist saying that. But what does it mean? That's a fair question. What does that mean? So here's what we believe. Whenever you come up with a phrase like this, and if you have a concordance with you, and you can look it up on the internet too, but a concordance is, how is this word used in the rest of the Scripture, particularly the Old Testament in this case? Right is very positive. Right hand of the Father, Jesus said, is the good side. That's where the sheep go. The left hand, the bad stuff. Well, we find those themes in the Hebrew Scriptures. For example, Isaiah 41:10 says, the righteous at the right hand of God. And Genesis 48:14. Now, this is interesting. Do you remember when Jacob was blessing all his sons? But he eventually comes to the children of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. And so Manasseh is over here. Yeah, you got it, exactly. Manasseh is the firstborn. And so Ephraim's over here, Manasseh's over here. So everyone's expecting, he's going to put his left hand on Ephraim because that's the second-born, and his right hand on Manasseh. But instead, Jacob goes like this, crosses his arms, and his dad, you got that messed up. And he says, I do not have it messed up. The primary blessing is going to Manasseh. So when you look at the way the Scripture uses it, for whatever reason, left is bad or not as good, and right is a place of favor. And so that is why it reads this way. The heart of the wise, you could say, has the blessing of God, and the heart of the fool does not. But I think this is a great verse to learn a little hermeneutics, how to interpret the Scripture. So, to give you another example, because I love rabbit trails, Revelation chapter 5. Do you remember the description of the Lion of Judah? So, John is weeping because no one is worthy to open the scrolls. And so, one of the elders says, don't weep, the Lion of Judah, he's able to open the scrolls. So he turns and he looks, and there is a lamb. But not an ordinary lamb. It's a lamb that looks like it was sacrificed, and it has 7 horns and 7 eyes. Now, that's a creepy looking lamb, as I would view it. And if I'm reading the book of Revelation, and I'm a fairly new Christian, what in the world does that mean? Now, quite honestly, if I'm an old Christian, I say, what in the world does that mean? But the way you figure it out is interesting. How are eyes used in the Old Testament? How is the number 7 used in the Old Testament? How is the word lion used in the Old Testament? How is the word lamb used in the Old Testament? And so let me break it down. Lion. So we read in Genesis 49 that Judah, this is part of Jacob's blessing, is a lion's cub. Who is Jesus? The Lion of Judah. And so I go, oh, it's referring to the blessing of Jacob to Judah. A light goes off. A sacrificial lamb. Well, that's not hard. Read the entire book of Leviticus. Sacrificial lambs all over the place. But then I see 7 eyes. In the Hebrew scripture, eye is a symbol of knowledge. When you look up, the light of, comes into the eye, symbol of knowledge. 7 of them, of the 600 plus references for 7 in the Old Testament, almost all of them convey perfection or completion. So if this lamb has 7 eyes, it is saying that Jesus has perfect knowledge. Horn, he has 7 of them. But if I look up horn in the Old Testament, I find out horn is a symbol of power. So Jesus has perfect power. Now, when you hear it explained this way, it can give you goosebumps. And you're like, Jesus is greater than I ever imagined. He's wonderful. But if you didn't do your homework, you're just scratching your head and you're like, that is the most baffling passage. And I have no clue what it means. Because the secret of apocalyptic literature is to get the image, get the feeling of what is taking place. Don't try to draw it. And in that sense, you gain something here. So with that in mind, looking at this in terms of the right and the left and being confused can just mean I'm a little lazy and don't want to look up the right and the left. And so I'm just kind of pushing you to say you'd probably be able to figure that out on your own and not come up with the conclusion of Republicans. Okay, number 3. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. Now, I think if it was modern day, I would add cars to this. That person is a total idiot. What are they doing? It's just basically you can observe a fool just by watching them. And I think we would probably be inclined to agree with that when we see some people doing rather dumb things. Like, for example, crossing the street without looking up while you're texting. It's true that if I hit you, you will probably sue me and succeed, but you're still a moron. And even as I am crying with my bankruptcy, there'll be a part of me that's saying your body would not be broken if you weren't texting while you were walking. And so wisdom says you can observe the fool that way. Here's another one. If a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. This, I think, is wonderful wisdom. Absolutely wonderful. Because all of us make mistakes. We all do. But if you are calm in your response of your mistake and don't try to be very, very defensive, I think you can win. Last Monday, right before this class, I wrote a letter to a church leadership board that I spoke very frankly in. I was dumb because I didn't really have the relationship connection by which they could understand my frank words, and they were offended. Today, 1 week later, I wrote my grovel letter. I said last week, I want to apologize for my letter. It sounded arrogant and patronizing and not at all respectful. And while I do hold my views passionately, I conveyed them poorly, and I am so sorry. I hope you will forgive me. I got a letter from their entire board, one by one, saying, "Oh, we love you, Pastor Steve. We think you're the," They started gushing. But I knew what happened at the meeting because I had a little fly on the wall there and let me know how my letter came across. And I just want to say, wisdom says, grovel a little, build relationships. In this case, don't put your heels in the sand. Be calm, and you can win. You can still win hearts. Particularly, I tell you, some people, they win your heart, you win their heart when you apologize. Because it shows that you're a bigger person who's willing to grovel a little bit. And so I just think that's great advice. Remain calm, hang in there. Verse 5, there is an evil I have seen under the sun. Well, he's seen lots of evil as far as I can tell here. The sort of error that arises from a ruler. And this stands on its own, meaning you don't need to read further, but its point is very simple. If you have a ruler who is making dumb choices, it is an evil under the sun. I would affirm it's very true. When you see that, it's not good. Going on, fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy low ones. Now, here's an example that I'm not sure I agree with him. Now, it seems that in our world, the rich have most of the high positions, while the poor don't. And I say the rich can be quite foolish. This is how I observe it. But the preacher, the teacher, seems to genuinely favor the rich. But let me explain why I think he does. I think he sees it because in a Hebrew mindset, people who are rich often got there because they were righteous and wise. Now, this is a biblical mindset. Comes in the books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that the righteous one and the person who's accumulated wealth actually did so because they were wise. We don't look at it that way. We look at it as, well, they got their wealth because they invested well, and maybe they were a wise investor, or maybe not, but we don't automatically associate wealth with wisdom. In fact, I watched a YouTube video this morning during breakfast. The famous rock stars who are dirt poor because of bad investments. So here are these people who have like huge success, so we think, but they squandered it all. They never paid their taxes. Meanwhile, they bought all this money, and then the IRS says, you owe me $16 million. And they're like, I don't have $16 million. And so they're now, in fact, there's a funny album by Willie Nelson because he owed like $4 million in taxes. And it's a series of songs. I think he titled the albums My Tax Payoff. In other words, please buy my album so I could pay off my taxes. So yeah, we don't view riches as automatically wisdom, but I do think in his world, he's looking at they tend to be the wiser people. 7, I have seen slaves on horseback while princes go on foot like slaves. Now, he's not viewing slaves on horseback as a positive. and Prince is walking as a negative. He's saying, that's messed up. Again, I'm not sure I agree with that offhand. And, and you say, Pastor Steve, are you arguing with Scripture? Well, I'm saying I do not understand his point of view. I'll put it that way. And I would say if the Lord Jesus was here and he could help me understand what's going on, Jesus seems to err on the side of the poor an awful lot. So I will say, for the benefit of the doubt, I don't get the teacher here. I would say it's kind of nice to see a slave on a horseback now and then. It feels better. All right, here's some great wisdom. By the way, I've used this next verse for some girls I dated in high school. Back then, you kind of like ended your letter and you put a scripture verse in the bottom of it. I used to put Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 8. Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Because they were thinking that I was going to put a verse like, the Lord bless you and keep you, or something sweet. And so they would look up the verse and they go, what's this? That was my very sarcastic response. Obviously, the women I gave that verse to, I probably wasn't that interested in. But I thought it was kind of funny at the time. Although now when I look back, it was kind of rude. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. It's just a truism. I mean, I don't know how to say, if you work with stones, you might get injured. You work with an axe, you might get injured. If the axe is dull and its edge is unsharpened, more strength is needed. Is that true? Yeah, I think it is. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that in terms of wisdom, but I would not disagree with that statement. But skill will bring success. Now there's your nugget. Sharpen the axe head. This would make sense. And so if I'm looking for the wisdom on that particular line, it is that phrase. It is skill will bring success. 11, if a snake bites before it is charmed, the charmer receives no fee. I guess. I wish, brethren, that I had profound things to say over some of these, but I do not. I mean, I read 3 commentaries preparing for tonight. None of them had anything profound to say on this. As I really can't describe any more with that. Words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips. At the beginning of their words are folly. At the end, they are wicked madness. And fools multiply words. This is gold. And I wish I applied this to myself more often. How many times I have spoken too much and went down a path. Last week, as an example, when I wrote to the leaders of that church. Here I'm thinking I'm so profound, and what I did was really just alienate myself from them. I had a friend in high school who always used to say, better to be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. It's funny, when you're quiet, people think you're so profound. Wow. And my wife is always telling me, Steve, when you take somebody to lunch, if there's food left on your plate, but nothing on their plate, you've been talking the whole time. And I actually now apply that, the plate test. And I go, oh my goodness, my plate is untouched. And the other person is like wiping their mouth, getting ready to wrap up. And I'm like, I am so sorry. I just dominated this whole conversation. Now, sometimes I might say something profound, but often not very. So it's a problem. This is an example where I want to take the advice that the teacher is saying. Next line, no one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone what will happen after them? Okay, it's true. Do you know what's coming? We don't. Who can tell what's going to happen after them? We don't know. So Don't be so arrogant as to say that you have it all figured out. Verse 15, the toil of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. In other words, fools are doing things that are not productive, not useful, and therefore they are lost in terms of, finding their way to town. Verse 16, woe to the land whose king was a servant and whose princes feast in the morning. Now, on the first line, I do not know what he means. Woe to the land whose king was a servant. Now, let me give you an example of why I don't know what he means. John 13. Jesus picks up a bowl of water and a basin and a towel and washes the disciples' feet. And he says, he who wants to be the greatest must be the least, and I am among you as one who serves. So I think I would kind of want my king to be a servant like Jesus. I'm not sure exactly the nuance here. And by the way, when you read the commentaries and these kind of things, they speculate as to what he may mean by this. But being that in the past he views it as fools end up in leadership positions while the rich are working for them, maybe it's a negative, derogatory thing of a king being a servant. I'm not sure. But the second statement is more clear, and whose princes feast in the morning. That seems to be the partier. The partier. You don't want a king, you don't want a prince that parties. By the way, I'm going to give you a hermeneutical principle that I usually find helpful, but it's failing me here. The principle is, in Hebrew poetry, it goes by parallelism. In other words, one line is repeated in the second line, and that second line can often add clarification for the first line. So in the second line, the prince who feasts in the morning. So it sounds like a partier. But that doesn't help me too much. Woe to the land whose king was a servant. I don't know, unless it means that the king was a fool, ended up being a servant. I think the implication is the king is a fool, but it doesn't come across too clear to me. Number 17, blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth and whose princes eat at a proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. Now, this actually makes sense. When you see noble birth, I want you to think of, really, if you've watched any episodes of the Queen of England, of anything, what you find is Queen Elizabeth very conscious of how she acts for the sake of the nation. In other words, she wants to act dignified. She wants to act appropriate. And what it's saying is, if you have a king who's a partier, who is, debauching themselves, this is not good. But what they mean by eating a meal at the proper time, in other words, they're honoring protocols, which means they are careful with their lives, which conveys wisdom. So that is what is being unfolded in this one. So that line actually makes some good sense. Number 18, through laziness the rafters sag, because of idle hands the house leaks. That's a beautiful example of parallelism. It says the same thing in two different ways. And so in the one sense, you have laziness, the rafters are just pokey. They're not getting anywhere. And because of idle hands, the house leaks. And so that's principle. You want to have a leaky roof? Be lazy. You want to lose the race? Be lazy. Number 19, a feast is made for laughter. Wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. Now, Here's an example. Remember I said during the quiz that he's going to mention something favorable about money? Well, here it is. He just said. Now, let me ask you the question again. As good Christians, what do you think of, and money is the answer for everything? Say it again.
I said I would agree.
You would agree. See, here's an example, I think, that we have torn hearts. Our practical side says, I would agree, but our spiritual side says, no, it can't be that way. So what is going on in this passage? And again, I looked at every kind of commentary to come up with what they say. Every one of them feels basically what you're saying is true. He is seeing it as a truism that money fixes all kinds of problems. Now, the truth is, if you have cancer, is money going to fix it? Might get you a little better health care, but you still die. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of things that money cannot do. He is not speaking, remember this is a wisdom passage though, he's not saying it always happens this way, but we do find it happen often that way. And it seems that way. But if we were to take all of what the teacher says, in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10, he says these words, money does not satisfy. So he does say money does not satisfy, but he also makes this comment, money is the answer for everything. Once again, I pause and I reflect and I think, what's the truth of that? And you know what? For every wise, wealthy person, there's a whole lot of people who are unhappy with all the money that they have. They don't even know how to process it, do it, handle it, and it clearly is not going to be in fact, he mentions this himself, that the person who comes from work sweaty might be happier than the person who doesn't sweat when they work. And I think his point when he was talking about that was that the worker doesn't have time to worry about life. You know, they're just too busy working. But they're happier as a result. And the person who has the time to ponder often finds themselves depressed and discouraged by all the absurdities of life. But this is, again, one of these lines. You know, sometimes as a teacher, I feel like useless because I'm supposed to be telling you all the profound meanings of things that I've come to the deeper understanding of this text. And there's a lot of the teacher's comments that I don't love. This is one of them. I see the practical truth of it, but I don't want to agree with it. I kind of want to kick back. Number 20, do not revile the king, even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and the bird on the wing may report what you say. So this is a very simple meaning. If you're bad-mouthing someone of power, watch out. It can come right back and hurt someone. And we have seen this in our own lives, our own experience, and it's just saying be wise about that. Once again, this is a wisdom principle. It's not saying it happens all the time, but it is saying it would be prudent to watch what you say, particularly relating to people of power. Which brings us now to chapter 11. Verse 1. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return. Here's the literal Hebrew. Cast your bread upon the water, and in time it will come back. Now, I have heard this verse used so many ways. If you're listening to some of the health and wealth preachers, they will say, this is why you should give to my ministry. You're sowing bread upon the water, and it will come back to you. To which one commentator said, soggy bread? Is that good? So what does this actually mean? So there's two major interpretations. Here's one that is ancient. I mean, it is from before the time of Christ. that what it is referring to is care for the poor, and you will have a reward in heaven. Is that what it means? Not sure. But that is, the reason why they get that is bread is sustenance, it's life. The fact that you're casting it out implies you're giving it out somewhere. And the fact that it comes back seems to be you're going to get a reward at some point. I think a probable better interpretation is actually related to the next verse. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. So if you look at that, it seems if verse 1 is paralleled in verse 2, make investments. And so if you do have investments, what does your broker tell you? Diversify. So if you have all your stock in one thing, you could lose it. You know, my father never did the stock market, but he is a sentimental man who worked for the Long Island Railroad. So there was this new company that started in 1970 called Auto Train. Now the concept seemed brilliant. Take your car to Florida with you. You know, the seniors don't like driving the long distance, so what if a train took their car down to Florida? And you ride in a sleeper, and your car is in a freight car on the other part of the train. That was brilliant. It had great success for 2 years. My father decided to buy a lot of stock at Auto Train. Oh, this is a win. Everybody's going to want to do this. And then Auto Train had several major derailments. And the people who used Auto Train had Mercedes and Cadillacs and Lincolns. And Auto Train couldn't pay the legal fees. And they shut down. And my father lost every penny he invested in Auto Train. He was not diversified.
It's the same thing as putting all your eggs in one basket.
Say it again?
You know the saying, putting all your eggs in one
Yes,
basket?
exactly. Putting all your eggs in one basket would be a good example. Sometimes there's no way around it. I don't know for those of you who do investments, but this was not a happy week this past week, because when this Omicron virus news came out, the market went down like 2.5%, which is huge. And so I'm looking at my mother's investments. I don't have that much money, but my mother has some investments. And I watch, whoa, how can you lose that much money in one day? And you're like, wow, that's fascinating. And you know what? She's diversified. Everything's sunk because of this fear, you know, people have with this kind of Omicron virus thing. But the simple principle, I think you can interpret verse 1, cast your bread, in that investment sense. It is wise to invest. And by the way, Jesus would affirm this himself. Remember, he talks about the guys with the talents? There was this person who, a king, you know, he gave 1 talent to one person, 2 talents to another, 5 talents to another. And he encouraged investment. And I think that's wise.
Pastor Steve, can number 11, verse 1 be
Yes.
about trading also?
Trading, yes, that's what I'm saying. In fact, that's why the NIV translates it that way. It's trying to lead the reader to say that this is trading. And that's a possible translation, but the phrase grain in Hebrew, depending on context, can be translated bread or grain. One of the challenges of Hebrew, it's a very broad lexicon. So you have one word, like my famous example of this is ruach. Ruach means spirit of God, but it also means wind. So which is the right translation? Context tells us the meaning. So did the wind come upon David when he was anointed with oil? No, spirit. That makes sense. Spirit came upon him. But Genesis 1:1, and the Ruach of God hovered over the face of the earth. That could be wind, could be spirit. And so it depends on the translation. It's a hard one to make an assessment of. But that's the nature of Hebrew. That's why you can have various translations. We're going to end today, by the way, with another baffler, and I'm going to show you all these different translations and how everyone's trying to make heads or tails of it. Number 3, verse 3. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. No duh. I am sorry, teacher. I did not find that particularly profound. I think we would, though, say in our world, it is what it is. And we do use that phrase. But that's all he's saying. If it goes this way, that's the way it is. Can't really push back to it. Number 4, verse 4. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. Now, this is easier to understand than first glance. Basic point is, the people who reap are the doers, not the ones who are contemplating their navel. So the one who is lying on the back and say, oh, look at the pretty clouds. Aren't they wonderful? Meanwhile, the other person is working. Jesus gives a similar story with those who keep their lamps trimmed and bright. It's those who are active, waiting for the bridegroom to come. So this is just saying, if you want to reap, work. Don't contemplate, the wind. And the wind, by the way, is pointing out an absurdity. Can you see the wind? No. So if you're trying to look for the wind, you will not find it. So don't bother looking for it. Verse 5, as you do not know the path of the wind, or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. Now, this is a profound statement, and I would call it also a profound statement of humility. It's very similar to the Isaiah passage where I said, my ways are not your ways. And so he's describing, do you know the path of the wind? You don't. I mean, you could see a flag blow, but you ever see these days where the flag blows in both directions and it's like, what is going on with that? You just can't figure it out. Or how is the body formed in a mother's womb? That is like the greatest mystery imaginable, that this child comes out and like, wow, where did this come from? You know how it came from biologically, but the fact that this living being is now in your arms and was once inside of you, that's hard to believe. It is amazing. David puts it in Psalm 139, refers to the mystery of this, that you knew me in my mother's womb when you knit me together. It is just stating that it is God's handiwork. So since you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things, have a modicum of humility that you just can't figure it out, what's going on. Number 6, sow your seed in the morning, and at the evening let your hands not be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do of equally well. This is back to that don't put all your eggs in one basket. Have multiple investments, various things that you're doing. Basically, keep busy. It makes sense. So I honestly like it when the teacher makes sense, that I can, get a grip on that and apply it to myself. Now, this next section is the beginning of the end. And so next week, we're just going to do chapter 12. But this is, you might say, the preamble for chapter 12. We read this. Light is sweet, and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. Now, this is our 7th joy passage and our last in the book of Ecclesiastes. So get excited. We're about to have a joy moment for the teacher. But this first line, verse 7, I actually think is kind of profound. Life under the sun is harsh. The whole book he's been telling us this. Under the sun, under the sun, under the sun. Now he's telling us, look up and see the sun. And what does he say? It's pleasing. It pleases the eyes to see the sun. Have you guys ever done anything like crazy, like go to Montauk Point to watch the sun rise? I mean, I don't know if you have. It's a haul to get out there. But it's magnificent. Or sometimes, Wilson, you're a pilot. When you're in the air, you see some of the most stunning sunrises and sunsets. It's just awesome, beautiful. We can see what he's saying here. So I would say see it in that context of, not the blinding sun midday when you can't see. But when we see beauty, we refer to sunrises and sunsets. They are gorgeous. They are beautiful. But I think the profound statement here is when we lift our countenance higher. Countenance, let me say that right. Countenance higher. It does lift our spirits. And so if that is a metaphor that we can apply, what are the things that lift our countenance? I already mentioned, who do you have lunch with that makes you happy? Who do you have lunch with that depresses you? Who are the phone calls that lift your spirits? Which are the phone calls that bring you down? I would also say, this is going to sound a little sacrilegious, but depending on your mood, are there some Bible books better to read than others? When you are depressed, do not read Ecclesiastes. I mean, it'll put you over the edge, But you know what I do read when I'm down? Book of Philippians, which is often called the Epistle of Joy. Over and over again, Paul says something wonderful. Or if you want to see who you are in Christ, read the first 3 chapters of Ephesians. Paul says over and over and over again, everything we have in Christ. It's magnificent. By the time you're done with chapter 3, it is like you're walking on air. It's just so magnificent and wonderful. And then in light of that, then he starts teaching us chapter 4, 5, and 6. But he doesn't do that hard stuff until he bathes us in that which is wonderful. And so, I think we need to look at the sun. And by the way, this applies to what news shows you watch, what television in general you watch, what books you read. Because if you're looking at stuff which is bringing you down to the pit, because, I've had as a pastor to write prescriptions of people of turn off the news. Because some people, particularly seniors, they watch it all day long. And if you watch some of these shows, it's like the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And it's just not good. Not good at all. So, look up. Good principle. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. I think if we were to take this phrase as a summation of the entire book, enjoy your food and drink, enjoy your job, enjoy the blessings of life. In chapter, I think it was 3, maybe 4, he talked about the joy of relationships. 2 are better than 1. He just talks about these moments that there are joy. Enjoy them. Celebrate them. And now he turns his page. But let them remember the days of darkness. For there will be many. Everything to come is meaningless. Okay, he gave us a brief moment of joy, and now, back to meaninglessness. But with this in mind, what happens as the years go by to our bodies? Doesn't function quite the way it used to. We have some young people here. God bless you. But when my wife and I bought our house in Nevada, which I eventually will be heading to, the reason I picked this particular house is because the master bedroom is on the main floor. Almost every house in this neighborhood that we looked at, the master bedrooms were upstairs. But you know what? I am helping my mom every day go to the bathroom, with her walker. And I've helped my father with his Parkinson's. I help my father-in-law and my mother-in-law. And you know what? I got a master bedroom on the main floor. I hope that I will remain healthy and then one day go to bed and wake up in glory. Lord, that would be cool. I'm good with that. But there is a possibility that I won't get exactly. And so what is he saying here? I think it is be wise to recognize that is the way of life. And so if you know that a storm may be coming, what do you do to prepare for the storm? There are no ifs, ands, or buts about growing older. I love the way Greg Laurie, the evangelist, puts it. He says the statistics on death are very impressive. 1 out of 1 will die. And since that is the case, let's be wise. And you know, there are different ways you invest. You know, my wife and I love movies. And a movie that I like, probably none of you have seen it, is called Mystery Men. It's about these loser superheroes. I mean, they're like crazy powers that, you know, there's one called the PMS Avenger, because for 4 days a month she can like kill anyone, you know. And, you know, I mean, there's another one who gets angry, and when he's angry, he's really strong, kind of like a Hulk kind of thing. Anyway, one of the superheroes called the Shoveler. He hits people over the head with a shovel, you know, kind of thing. And he's saying to his wife is like trying to understand her crazy husband. And he goes, "I shovel well." And his wife says, "You're the best shoveler I know." Anyway, I'm coming from my mother's bedroom. Now, I have taken my mother and I put her to bed. Here's the routine. I help her out of the chair, bring her into the bathroom. I am singing to her the entire way. You know, some chorus hymn, you know, I've got a mansion just over the... And she sings with me. We get her into the bathroom. While she's on the pot, I also give her the toothbrush so she can multitask because she can't stand really. And, you know, she's brushing her teeth and takes care of all this stuff. Then I wipe her mouth and, you know, take care of all the necessities. Then we walk her back to the room and she help her into bed. I tuck her in. I tickle her feet. Basically, the same thing I did with my kids, I do with my mom, you know, have some fun. And then I sometimes sing to her again. Like sometimes I sing the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, or we just pray. And then I kiss her and I say, "Mom, I love you." And she goes, or she cries or, you know, something. And then I say, "Good night, Mom," and I shut the door. And then I come where my wife is waiting for me on the couch where we're going to watch Chopped, you know. And I say, and this is our inside joke, I come to my wife and I go, "I shovel well." And she says, "You're the best shoveler I know." And I'm just referring to, it felt good, you know. But here's the side thing. So one of my daughters said to me, "Dad, we are watching how you take care of your parents, so we know how to take care of you." So make an assessment as to where is Mom and Dad right now. You know, how are you treating them if they're alive or things like that. I think that's a profound statement. And so caring for my mother well, in my opinion, is helping me to be well cared for when that time comes. Is darkness coming? Yes, it is. So, with that in mind, I will take steps preparing for those challenging days. After all, everything is meaningless. All right, verse 9. You who are young, be happy while you are young. Let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. This is actually incredible wisdom that I am instructed by Peter, our youth director. This is my topic that he asked me to speak on next week for youth group. So at the youth meeting, I'll be speaking in the Manhasset one, just for point of reference. But at the Friday night group, I'm going to be telling the young people, enjoy being young. And I'm talking about all the cool things about being young. You know, when I was on track, I felt like lightning. You know, I was fast. You know, the fun of dating. You know, if you've entered that world as a young person, it's fun. You know, it's scary, but it's also fun. You got your peak body. I mean, all these things you got going for you. But what does the teacher say? Be careful. Because everything you're doing will ultimately be assessed by God. So in other words, have good, clean fun. That's what he's saying. Be wise in what you're doing because you can run into problems. So I love comedians, and I love particularly, I don't know why, female comedians. And there's one of them on Netflix. Her name is Taylor Tomlinson. Taylor Tomlinson. Guess why I like Taylor Tomlinson? Because we share a last name. And when I listen to her, she obviously grew up in a Christian home because she's talking all the time of what it was like to grow up with conservative mother and father and church going and all this kind of stuff. But one of the things her special is called this. It's called Mid-20s Crisis. In other words, she's like 25 when she records it, and she says, I feel like I'm in the middle of a crisis now. I'm in my mid-20s crisis. And she's talking about, you know, am I going to get married? Should I get married? You know, all these kind of feelings. And then she said this, I thought it was very profound. Am I doing anything now that I will be in counseling for in my 30s? That is an awesome question. Am I doing anything now that I will be in counseling for in my 30s or in rehab in my 30s? Good question to ask. And in that same sense, that's all the teacher is saying. Enjoy your youth. Have fun in your youth. And God's going to check it out, what you're doing. Now comes the last verse with lots and lots and lots of opinions on it. So then, banish anxiety from your heart and cast off troubles of your body, for youth and vigor are meaningless. So here he is, enjoy your youth. By the way, it's meaningless. And you know, I think he's pointing out what happens in the end. But here's the thing. Here's where I want to say is the tough one. So then, banish anxiety from your heart. You know what? I'm going to give this verse to all of our counselors at the church because almost everyone who comes to see a counselor is dealing with some level of anxiety. So all they need is this verse. And so every counselor will say, banish anxiety from your heart and you're good to go. All right, we don't need to see you anymore. Well, of course, my counselors will go broke if that was the case. I want to ask you this question. Does that mess with you at all? Can you just banish anxiety from your heart like that? It's not a light switch. I mean, I kind of wish it was a light switch. Now, if I was speaking to you as a pastor, let's say you came to me and said, Pastor, I'm dealing with anxiety. This is what I would say to you. The Apostle Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, be anxious for nothing, but in all things with prayer and petition with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God that passes all understanding will keep your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. Okay. But that's still a hard command to follow. Be anxious for nothing, but instead pray. Well, if it was that easy, wouldn't we all just do that? I'll just pray and I won't be anxious anymore. But we never read the next verse. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are good report, if anything is noble and praiseworthy, think on these things. So if I am going to do what the Apostle Paul says to deal with my anxiety, the first thing I might do is ask somebody to look at my life and make an assessment. Am I focusing on the pure, the good, the encouraging, or am I focusing on everything bad that's messing with me? Because that will help me break free from anxiety. But now I want to get to this verse itself. Here's the NIV. So then, banish anxiety from your heart and cast off the troubles from your body, for youth and vigor are meaningless. Now, here comes the English Standard Version. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. It's different. Let me give you another one. So remove grief and anger from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. This one makes some sense to me, because there is some things that I can control here, like anger. There are things I can do to mitigate anger. And there are some things I could do to mitigate grief. But it feels like I could do. Pain from your body. Well, there are certain things I could do to avoid pain too. Here's another one, New Living Translation. So refuse to worry. Now, that's like the NIV. Just turn that off. Refuse to worry. Keep your body healthy. Well, that makes sense. In other words, if I take care of the temple that God gave me, and that seems wise, and somebody might say, Pastor Steve, stop drinking that Diet Coke, but those kind of things, can you refuse to worry? I wish it was that simple, but I would say there are things I can do to mitigate against worry. Sometimes our minds go to the worst possible outcome. But you can choose to think about some of the better possible outcomes that can happen into your life. It's not all bad. Here's the message. Live footloose and fancy-free. You won't be young forever. Youth lasts about as long as smoke. Now, the reason why there are things like paraphrases, which the message is sometimes it cuts to the chase as to what is the heart of being saying. So footloose and fancy-free can be a negative term, but it can also be a positive term. Enjoy life. In other words, do the things that are fun in your youth. Enjoy those things. And keep in mind, those days will come to an end. And they do. So, we've been on our adventure again with the teacher. I confess humility in my ability to interpret many things that the teacher says. And I will share with you that when I was making the decision which book would we do as a study, I didn't want to do this book because I knew what was there. And I'm like, I don't have a lot of profound things to say on some of these issues. But just like I said at the beginning, when that guy said to me, when you preach on Sunday morning, you tend to pick which ones. And I pray, Lord, which shall I pick? But when I teach my Bible class, I cannot run and hide. So I have to plow through. And in teaching Ecclesiastes, I am humbly saying, I do not have it all figured out. But I do know this, that a more complete revelation came through Jesus Christ. And that revelation answers many of the questions that the teacher raises. So I am so grateful for Jesus. Let us pray. Father, we thank you that we've had a few minutes today to worship you through the study of your word. We pray, Lord, that you will now help us apply those wisdom principles that are clear to understand and applicable to our lives. And those that are a little mysterious, Father, I pray that you would help us understand them in their time. And I pray, Father, that the basics of enjoying our life, of enjoying our meals, of enjoying our jobs, and appreciating our youth in the context of knowing what the future will hold is all wisdom, and it's good. I pray, Lord, that we will live our lives for your honor and glory. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.